Well, welcome to the Tuesday, April 3rd, City Council Informational Meeting. We have just a few items on our agenda this afternoon. Our first item is a staff report by City Clerk Tom Greco.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if okay, I'll just brief from here very quickly. I just have 5 items that I want to talk about between events that are happening between basically Thursday and next Wednesday. The first one is just a reminder that the public test of the tabulating equipment will be held at the old extension office across the street from the County Administration Building this Thursday at 1:30 p.m. That's open to the public. On Saturday, a reminder, we will have in-person absentee voting at the Minnehaha County Auditor's Office. That's 415 North Dakota Avenue for all Sioux Falls residents or all Sioux Falls voters and Sioux Falls School District voters. Again, that's 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Absentee voting in person ends on Monday. It's ongoing right now at the Auditor's Office, same address. 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday will be the last day. Again, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. That's an opportunity. If you can't make it to the polls on Tuesday, you can go to the auditor's office and cast your ballot there. Of course, the election's on Tuesday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The polls will be open. We have been encouraging citizens, voters, to check their registration, to check their polling place. That could be found online, or you could call our office at 367-8080. We've sent some postcard reminders out to various precincts, as I've briefed in the past. We are prepared to manage the construction on Ellis Road for one of our polling places there. Appreciate the cooperation, of course, with the Public Works Department. And then, of course, we'll be tabulating on Tuesday night. That process is open to the public. It is at the old extension office, 220 West 6th Avenue. There will be some parking restrictions, but we'll make sure that's clear with some signage the night of, because we want to keep the parking lot immediately adjacent to the facility open to our election workers. And finally, ballot order drawing, if we are going to have a runoff, will be Wednesday morning, bright and early at 8:30 a.m. here in Carnegie. We may have up to 2 races where we conduct a ballot drawing for a runoff. We'll know that Monday or Tuesday night. And of course, we'll do the drawing Tuesday, and I'll begin the process for planning in earnest the runoff election. And then I do plan on coming before you next Tuesday at the Informational just to give you an update on what happened the day prior and the path forward. With that, I'll answer any questions anyone may have.
Any question for our city clerk? Thank you very much, Tom, and I will add a job well done. I know that you are being overworked right now, but you're performing great work, and we appreciate what you're doing for us.
Thank you. Happy to do it. Me and our team.
Absolutely. It's never just a one-person effort, is it? Okay, that brings us to our next item, which is City Council open discussion. Any items for open discussion? Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. I just want to quickly mention this last week there was a mental health and criminal justice summit held at Augustana College University, last week. There was approximately 80 attendees and national speakers from Salt Lake, Utah, as well as a few other places, just sharing their expertise of things that work in their community as we continue to engage and talk about the triage concept and what that looks like. We know every state is different. We know every community is different, and there's different laws, ordinances, and rules that garner that. And so we want to be keep doing our due diligence, but it was a great time to network with those folks as well as just keep the conversation moving as we're talking about jail population and those super utilizers in our community. I'm hopeful to have Aaron Sertzka and Carrie Benz come and present to this City Council in the couple months ahead, whether it's public services or even an informational meeting, just to continue the conversation, making sure that everyone is aware of that conversation and what's taking place. So it was well attended. Many legislators came as well as providers from both hospitals, people from that work in the jail, state's attorney's office, other just really a broad spectrum of folks, as well as college students. And so if you want additional information, I can certainly have that emailed over to you as well. That's it.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other items? Councilor Staley.
Two items. First of all, I just wanted to say kind of a thank you to the people who put the prayer breakfast together on Good Friday last week. It was really a lovely event, and it was well attended, and the testimony and the prayers and everything was just very meaningful to me, and I think it's wonderful when we have our community coming together like that. And I also think it's wonderful that we have a prayer at our meetings. I hope we'll always continue to do that. It's kind of sets us apart from the county and the school district because they don't do that. And then, Councilor Erickson, I'm glad you brought up the triage center because there was a article or a story about that on KSFY. They had the sheriff on, and I am eager to have a presentation to all of us about that after the election would be very appropriate, I think. And I know one of the things people are asking is how that looks as far as funding and how that moves ahead. So that I'm eager for that. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yes. And can I just respond?
Absolutely.
So it's communicated that state does not mandate that the city pay any funds. The city does contribute about $157,000 through our police department for the detox sobering center. The rest of that is made up by the county, which I think comes to the two combined close to $500,000, maybe a little bit more than that. And so the intent as they move forward is to look at that. Funding is a huge component, but a lot of it is going to change our culture of thinking of how we've always done things. We're probably going to have to streamline some processes. We're going to have to find a location, which that sometimes is controversial as well, because we want it close to services, but we don't want to over inundate certain neighborhoods, we'll say. And so I know they're mindful of that. We've had breakout sessions. I've been going to meetings for the last about 18 months with Commissioner Karski, something that I kind of just, based on something I said, stumbled into and got invited to attend. But Carrie Benz and Aaron Surtzka have been the real leaders in getting the people together, as well as Suzanne with Augustana. The three of them have statistics and data that are amazing, that have never been shared before, from hospitals to the jail, and how that looks. And so I'll continue to just work with them. I know there's a business plan coming forward in phases, and so they'll soon have some announcements and reports coming forward as far as how are we going to implement this and what are the challenges. Funding is clearly a huge challenge of it, and we'll need to partner with the state as well. Pennington County is also looking at this. I know Mayor Allender has been a big advocate, where we've done pretrial task force in Minnehaha County that does impact our police department. I sat on that as well. And Minnehaha County also received the same grant funding that Minnehaha County did. And so a lot of these projects, since the two largest cities and regions across the state, they're looked at as more regionalized versus just only Sioux Falls, but we've got to take off low-hanging fruit and try to implement it in small increments. And so I know there's been collaboration with Rapid City as well. So I'll hopefully have more information soon for you and get something scheduled. We've done it before when we've had the county, city, and school district meetings at Hy-Vee, where we do those once a month. That has been a time where Carrie Benz has reported to all of us as well, and I think that might have been before the new council, and so it's appropriate to have that done again.
Councilor Staley.
And I guess as far as keeping the public in the loop and us, maybe putting out a periodic little summary of where we're at with it with bullet points, just like with the legislative update. I know our staff members are really good about telling us in concise language, so we don't have to dig through a report, what's happening, where we're at. And then also, I think inviting us to maybe, if you're having a meeting, or inviting the community to the meetings too, so we're all kind of aware of how this looks as we're moving forward. I think that would be really helpful.
Sure, I will pass
And
this
again,
on.
I think this, because we're all busy, we all have other jobs, and having this informational time, you're going to do that, that's great. And a forum where we are sharing this information with everybody, I think will be wonderful.
I will pass that along. Thank you.
Any other items for open discussion? Councilor Selberg, any items of open discussion?
No, but thank you for acknowledging me.
You're very welcome. That means now that we're going to move on to the next item, and that is the 8th Street Bridge Rehabilitation Project that will be presented to us by our Director of Public Works, Mr. Mark Cotter. And I see, Mark, you have a number of members of your team present this afternoon.
We do, as well as our design consultant is here. Thank you, Council Chair and Council, for having us today. In the audience for Public Works, we have Chad Heavey as our city engineer. Jeff Delores is our assistant city engineer. Wes Phillips is our principal street engineer. He also leads the bridge maintenance and reconstruction programs. And then also local consultant, infrastructure design group, and Chad Hanish is here. He's an owner, and then his structural engineer is Vanessa Victor. So thanks for having us. We wanted to give you a perspective today really about the state of our bridges and then really focus on the 8th Street Bridge. As a city, there's 50 structures that ultimately we manage to make sure that we can maintain them and ultimately maximize their service life. There's probably 2/3 of those are actual bridges. About 1/3 of them are actual box culverts that are longer than 20 feet in length and fall into this category of a structure that needs to be inspected at a minimum of every other year. So what we typically do, there's a national database of the health of bridges, and there's a involved calculation as you do your inspections to get service life, sufficiency ratings, things of that nature. About 80% of those annual inspection costs are federal, and then we pay about 20%. So it's a good value. We use a local consultant to do our inspections. And one of the ones we want to highlight to you today is a very iconic structure. It's been in the center of our city for over 100 years, is the 8th Street Bridge. It was put into service back in 1912. And as we start to manage our 2 bridge programs, you have one that's a priority 6 that's in your capital improvement book that we fund about $350 up to $450,000 a year in maintenance for our bridges. That can involve everything from painting the railings to replacing approach slabs, putting epoxy deck seals on. We have a master plan that lays out and helps us prioritize which bridges, what timely investments need to be done. And then you have a second capital improvement project, which is, I believe, priority 11, that has the 8th Street Bridge in. This is our next bridge to address. It's our lowest efficiency rating of all of our 50 structures. And it's obviously, it seems quite a bit of deterioration over the last 15 years. It's time to make an investment into this bridge, whether we can rehabilitate it or replace it. And then the next one that will be in the queue that's also in the current capital plan is 6th Street. That one is also deteriorating, and we've budgeted for to do timely work to that one. So as we started to look at, as a team, this 8th Street Bridge, knowing that it's very iconic, it's on the historic registry, we started to first take a step back and say, what would it cost us to actually replace this bridge? And we started to see figures, what came in on the 12th Street Bridge, which was in excess of $12 million. This one, based on its span, its width, its importance to the city of Sioux Falls, would have been in that range as well. And so with that, we started to think, is there a rehabilitation option available to this bridge? And how do we actually find out if rehabilitation is an option? So let us take you through that analysis. IDG Group did the analysis with us. They essentially assembled all in total about 7 consultants to be on their team to do the very specific phases of analysis, and this is the net out to that question. So as a part of the agenda today, we'll cover the history, take you through the analysis, look through the alternative evaluation, next steps, and some proposed renderings. All right. So the first bridge that crossed the Big Sioux River, this was the first crossing of the Big Sioux River for the city of Sioux Falls, so it was very important. It was put in 1876, and essentially very shortly after that was washed out by flooding. It took 6 years later until a second bridge was built, and that proved to be insufficient for the demands of the traffic and the loads, and that one was not in service for very long. And then in 1912, the bridge that we have today, it's considered a Lutheran arch bridge, the patented bridge. It was put into service in 1912 and sourced from Western Contractor in 1911. So it was the greatest, most costly concrete bridge in the state of South Dakota. When you think back and as you drive over the 8th Street Bridge, that was an extremely wide bridge for its time to be built, especially back in that day with how we moved around the city. And so great forethought with those leaders that established that back in 1912. All right, so Lutheran Arch, that is a patented bridge. It was actually a professor that went to Purdue. Vanessa has done a substantial amount of research on the Lutheran Arch bridges to develop the study. And there was over, I think, 17,000 Lutheran Arch patented bridges built across the country. There was no plan since it's a patented bridge, and so we had to do a lot of respective testing so we could actually do a full analysis of the bridge. But we laugh, too, that it came with a 5-year flood-proof warranty back in the day. So it certainly stood the test of time. Historical, it has been a historic feature for the city of Sioux Falls, was put on the National Registry in 1993, and in the 1970s did go through a rehabilitation project. One of the most notable items that it went through was the railing that's on the bridge that's not original. That was a part of that rehabilitation, and also some of the surfacing that took place back in the 70s. All right, so the analysis, when we really start to dig in, and we wanted to be confident that this bridge could certainly last another 75 years. When you compare it against a new structure, that's really the platform. You want your structure to at least have a service life of 75 years. We do expect that if it's a rehabilitation option that's chosen, and that'll ultimately be the result today, that we know that there'll be additional work at about 30 years, but still in a reasonable fashion, not to the extent that we will undertake with this rehabilitation. So we looked at age, condition, and rehabilitation viability. When you start to look at those colorings on the deck, that's some of the analysis that takes place to understand the level of deterioration that's in the bridge. And so there's some minor deterioration that's in the yellow and the more orange on that outside 10-foot pour. This bridge is poured in 5 different pours. That's where we're seeing the majority of the deterioration. We've watched that. It certainly can be rehabilitated. And the time period between now and ultimately rehabilitation, we'll keep a close eye on that. We may move forward and just remove those parking spaces, those 2 on each side, just to not have any of those static loads in that parking space. The drive lanes are fine. There's no load restrictions in those drive lanes. All right, so some of the testing that we actually do, they bring in a firm locally and extracted cores, and then you take those cores and send them off for compressive strength testing. You know, even over 100 years later, that concrete is still testing out at over 4,000 pounds per square inch, which is fantastic news for us. We also send it off to another specialized lab that looks at the petrographic analysis, which really just breaks down all the materials that were in that original concrete and resteel when that bridge was poured. So they'll look at the aggregate, the size of the aggregate, the quality of the aggregate, the cement paste, if there are air voids, things of that nature. Also, when we extracted some of these cores, some of the resteel came out as well, and there's almost zero deterioration with that rebar, which is really remarkable having this bridge in service for over 100 years. Now when we build bridges, most of the time we're starting to either put in epoxy-coated bars or stainless steel bars to extend the life. And in here, we just had really good concrete covering on most of that re-steel, and it's in very good shape. All right, so if you'll notice that picture on the left, that's more white area. Just a few years ago, we had some instances more on the west side of the bridge, right above the bike trail. We had a police officer that drives the bike trail on their motorcycle came into City Hall and said, "Hey, there's a chunk of concrete just fell out of right above the bike trail. You guys should get down there." We went down there. It was some deterioration of some of that surface concrete. So we moved in and had a local contractor remove all that loose concrete and then essentially wrap it with fiberglass. And that's what is over both bike trails today and has provided a good sort of temporary measure to keep any of that loose concrete intact until we can actually move forward and do a full rehabilitation. So that's some of the analysis that's done to understand the level of deterioration, the spacing of the bars, the depth of the bars, so they can actually load this into a design software today, model it with today's loads to give us a sense of, will this bridge carry us into the next 75 years, okay? That middle picture you see, it looks really deteriorated. There's essentially no re-steel in that. That doesn't carry any loads. Looks terrible, but ultimately that can be rehabilitated, and that architectural feature as it is can look just fine once we're done. Okay. This gives you a sense of what some of the modeling moment outputs look like when Vanessa runs them in two different modeling software solutions. Conservative assumptions are made. Today, again, there's no restrictions on the drive lanes. We are watching those outside areas where the pedestrians and that parked cars are, that we may end up moving into removing about 4 parking spaces throughout the course of this summer as we position ourselves for the rehabilitation next year and or 20. All right, as part of the analysis, assembled and researched similar plans. There's been a number of these Lutheran arch bridges rehabilitated across the country. Researched several lessons learned on other projects from other consultants, and then added about halfway through the analysis an expert that has actually rehabilitated about 250 bridges in his career, and about 24 of them have been on Lutheran arch bridges. So we really wanted to have that confidence that when Tim Winning came into town, reviewed the analysis, reviewed this bridge, and as he walked up, he said, "This is a great candidate for rehabilitation." So we've really taken a thoughtful approach on not only assembling the right team, but getting the right analysis, running it into today's softwares to give us the confidence that rehabilitation is certainly a viable option for our city to consider. Here's a couple of case studies. This bridge is the Lutheran Arch Bridge that is much further deteriorated than what our current bridge is, and they went into a rehabilitation approach, and you'll see some construction photos and then a before and after here. Notice that architectural element that's on the outside, very similar to the one that we have in Sioux Falls, that can certainly be rehabilitated. All right, so as you look at, this is one in Cass County, was in 2007, had a rehabilitation cost of $1.8 million. And when you look at those arches, the thin part, it's solid concrete up to the roadway surface, but the open area, or the larger part near the piers, all that's open void. So as you see that picture where that red text is on that most left-hand side of the page, all that's earth that they end up taking out, cleaning it. We've got to establish better draining systems right now. That's really one of the biggest issues that we're facing with the rapid deterioration of our bridge, that will remove all that material that's in those arches, establish a new drainage system, and then ultimately then we'll backfill that and do the necessary patching on the undersides of the arches before anything starts to get rehabilitated. You'll notice on that center lower picture how they've rehabilitated those piers. If you go back to this first one, those piers were significantly deteriorated. They essentially remove all that loose concrete, reestablish the rebar that's needed, and then ultimately pour new cast-in-place concrete to establish the strength of that bridge. New railing was put on this bridge, and it's a great result. Okay. Here's a few other pictures. There are two of those bridges. All these went through rehabilitation strategies. Two of these are Lutheran arch bridges, the one in the upper left-hand corner and the one in the lower right-hand corner. But just a fantastic way to preserve history and keep this iconic bridge still in service for our city. Here's what some of those initial patchwork will look like once you remove the delaminated concrete, reestablish new rebar where needed, and then ultimately patch it back with high-performance concrete. This is what it would look like if you didn't do anything further beyond the repair. And so there's a couple of strategies that Vanessa and her team have evaluated. We can spray on shotcrete, which will give us a consistent finish and color, and or we could use a similar product that was put above those bike trails, which is the fiber reinforced wraps. Okay, one of the key things that we'll want to work closely with is the State Historic Preservation Office, since this is on the National Historic Registry, to make sure that they are supportive of what the finish of this bridge will ultimately look like. All right, so just give you an overview of really the three options that are in front of you. The concrete repairs and then spraying on a consistent finish shotcrete just for the common structural elements would be about a $3.2 million cost. If we did those same strategies but then did the fiber reinforced polymer wrapping, that would increase that cost up to about $4.1 million. Or if we completely remove the bridge, that bridge there is actually in Del Rapids. That just got reconstructed in Del Rapids. It gives you a very similar feel with that arch bridge. That one would be about $12.5 million. So when we start with that threshold, understanding that it can be rehabilitated, gave us great confidence and also cost control with this upcoming project. Vanessa has a financial model that's specific to bridges that looks at not only initial costs but required maintenance costs over the next 75 years, and then backs those back to present day value. And the rehabilitation with the shotcrete comes in as the lowest cost option. And we do expect that with the rehabilitation approach, we would be doing some additional repairs at year 30. But still, even with those additional costs factored in, still is a lower cost option than full replacement. All right, and so we wanted to just roll up some of the benefits that rehabilitation provides. We'll still have a good design life of 75 years. Construction timeline to rehabilitate a bridge like this is probably 5 months, as opposed to almost a full calendar year to take this bridge out of service and reconstruct it, which would significantly impact our downtown with the amount of growth and development that's happened, and also the importance of 8th Street to our downtown and daily commuters. Cost is obviously a factor. This is already showing up that the initial cost would be nearly $9 million less, and then it preserves history. One of the factors that you'll see when we bring in Confluence, which is another strong local contractor or local designer that is the designer of the River Greenway, they can add a lighting package to this bridge that'll wash those arches, very similar to what you see up in Minneapolis. And then on significant days, at holidays and or St. Patty's Day, you can change the color of those lighting packages. And so that'll be certainly a big part of our public involvement on this project is to really solicit from the community and the downtown area of what ultimately do we want this bridge to be once we're complete. All right, some next steps. So we continue to monitor. We have our designers down there every month looking at that outside 10 feet on each side of that bridge and that center arch. And again, we may, once the typical summer activity picks up and we start to see more parking needs on that bridge, if we see any change in the deterioration, we'll likely be removing those 2 parking spots from the north and south side of the bridge. Start the design process in 2018. We're going to want to, we've been already talking with local contractors about this project, but there are national contractors that would specialize in bridge rehabilitation projects that we would also want to get their feedback, but also want them to get interested in this project. Community outreach will be a significant part, specifically really for aesthetics and river greenway and lighting, and so we want to invest in community outreach and really make sure that this is a community project. And then ultimately designing construction, starting design in 2018. The soonest this work would take place is in 2019. We currently have it funded in 2019. The latest we would do it is in 2020. Okay, we don't want to rush to the design. We don't want to rush to the community outreach, and we've got a bridge that we're comfortable whether we do it in 2019 or 2020. So a couple of final slides with some proposed renderings. It's been one of those questions that we asked once we started to see the cost of replacement closer to $12.5 million. Really confident in the amount of analysis, the petrographic analysis that took place to really understand the strength of the concrete, the quality of the current concrete, and really those lessons learned that Mike Wennings, which is on the project team, has been involved with over 24 of these Lutheran Arch Bridge rehabilitations. We're very supportive of rehabilitation and wanted to present this option to you, ultimately to extend the life of the 8th Street Bridge. One last rendering. Here's a picture of those respective team members that were involved, Infrastructure Design Group. They're the lead consultants. They were here. Confluence, again, they're on their team as well. They also did the design of the River Greenway, so they're very familiar with that area and some of the challenges that came when we built the River Greenway: geotechnical, Braun, GAI, subsurface, and Kogel. With that, I wanted to just bring that to you today. The team is here if you have any questions for us.
Thank you very much, Director. Any questions? Councilor Neitzer.
Thank you. First of all, preservation of history is very important, so rehab would be my gut instinct. There'd have to be an incredibly compelling reason to demolish something on the historic register. Is this something that would be a low bid project, or is it so specialized you'd have to go another route to get a firm to do this, the actual construction work?
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that point, but I would expect that just based on the nature of the work, structural nature, we'll probably lean on some of those lessons learned, but potentially pre-qualifying bridge contractors, that may be a step one, and then ultimately going into a responsible bid would maybe be step two. Okay. Because I could certainly see in something specialized like this that we would potentially pre-qualify for bridge contractors, and then after that select the lowest responsible price.
So you have a way to basically narrow the list so it's not just anybody who just does bridges, because I would assume this is very specific.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Where is most of the load of this bridge being carried? Is it are there pillars that are down in the river, that are set in there, and has that been analyzed and that's all good? And
they have. So the first picture, I'll go back to it. So they call that scour, and so one of the concerns, what we attempted to do with this analysis is we wanted to go through a series of gates, and so I think we've got a picture of the IDG team in the river. So see that gentleman that's in the river, they're down there looking for scour. They essentially want to, there's a foundation system that gets put in to build a bridge, and then there's a concrete cap that goes over it. And if that is scoured out and then ultimately really deteriorates the foundation system, that can be a significant cost to rebuild your foundation systems. There's essentially no scour here. The depth of flow and the velocity of flow are fairly slow, and so we didn't see any of that. We feel really confident about the foundation, but essentially your loads are those two piers that are in the river, and then you have abutments that are on the end. So the entire weight of the roadway surface is split between the two abutments and those internal piers.
And then my last question, did you? I think I heard you say that in the curved part, it's actually, is it just earth that's backfilled in there, and it's just kind of concrete on the top and the bottom? It's
That's
not
right.
just one huge concrete.
That's right. So right over the pier, see where those triangles are cast into the outside parapet wall? Mm-hmm. Behind that concrete is just earth. And so a part of the reconstruction will include removing the railing, because that's not even at today's code. So that, and it's got a lot of salt deterioration. But that will be removed. The asphalt that's the roadway surface, I think our cores showed it, is it 12 inches thick? It's just that 12 inches thick of asphalt. So all that asphalt will get removed, and then essentially all that earth will get removed, vacuumed out, everything will get cleaned, and then we're going to reestablish how the drainage, if any water gets through the pavement, we got to have a positive way to get that out. And so all that will be cleaned. If any renovation has to be done to the top side, almost putting like a roofing membrane on top. And then that's probably also where the electricians will have some imports to actually get the lighting package. But then when we get all that work done, we're going to put like a larger stone back, about half the size of your hand. And ultimately, so all that water that gets in there can free drain through that stone mixture down to a relief and then out. So
That would be my last thing, was that the drainage would be important, because I could just imagine the earth freeze thawing and heaving the concrete. So,
right.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
and that's been one of the key factors right now. What's deteriorating this bridge quickly is the drainage is just in really poor shape.
May I just ask a follow-up question to that? Is there any difference between the weight of the soil that's currently used as fill and the rock that you will be using?
Not significant. And one of the ads that Vanessa brought to us is that we'll be able to switch the deck from 12 inches of asphalt to probably a 8-inch concrete. Will actually reduce the weight and be able to have a concrete deck, sure. Which is much longer serviceable life. So we've learned a lot through the process. Vanessa and her team have done a lot of research with other agencies that have rehabilitated these Lutheran arch bridges, and we're excited for the future of this bridge.
And if you increase the drainage, you decrease the load at the same time, too.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Councilor Rolfing.
I'm not a structural engineer or anything, but I do know when you throw a bunch of rocks in there and then you put a surface on it and you drive stuff over it, they settle. Somewhere in there it's going to settle. How do you stop that? I'm just following up on how do you stop that? You know, you put that 8 or 10 inches of concrete over that. How do you stop that from? Right,
so they'll put the aggregate in lifts and vibrate it so it actually gets probably to 90-95% of compaction, and then we build roads like that all the time, so we'll feel confident about that approach.
In with sand or anything to?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I figured there was a good reason, good answer for it.
Yep.
Let me ask on a question on the about your fourth slide in the one that has all the fancy coloring on it. How do you determine, what is a minor deterioration? Is there do you use that, those people that come in with that van that drive across it, or is this all visual?
No, there's some special tools that were used. Vanessa, do you want to give a perspective of that?
So the vans that you're
Malcolm,
referring.
could you just state your name and
Sorry.
who you represent again?
I'm Vanessa Victor with Infrastructure Design Group. Did the analysis on the bridge. The vans you're depicting are ground penetrating radar. For this scenario, there's limits to what it can do, and since we have so much earth fill 7 foot above the pier, it doesn't read quite properly. So there are handheld units that can be used, but they max out at about 12 inches, and above the piers, the concrete there is actually 26 inches thick. So we backed up. Most of the findings are actually based off of visual and soundings. So everything was hammer tested, and then we have an impact echo hammer that we also use, and that tells us how sound the concrete is for how many inches. Technically, I can show you another graph that has multiple colors that go to a ½ inch deterioration to 1 inch, but it is all calibrated by a ½ inch gauge. This is just a little bit better for visualization.
So we're good to within a ½ inch?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's close enough for county work, right? Anyway, one other thing on the, I had one other question. I got to get to it. Oh, the core samples that were taken. That fascinates me that you could just drill a piece out of that and keep it. You obviously didn't drill all the way through, or you did all the way through, and so you know what's in the middle is the best, obviously. Did you do any of that under the water for those, the base, so to speak?
Actually, no, we did not. Most of the foundation testing was done by hammer testing. There is really, I mean, you can go out to the structure today, you'll see very little deterioration, especially since that's a water line that's prone to deterioration more than any other spot, and it's very sound concrete.
Even well under the 5 foot or however deep it is there, 5, 6 feet, yeah, that's good. Isn't that amazing? They built that 100 years ago and that stood up. Must have been quartzite that they put into the concrete.
Yeah.
More than likely.
Most
Okay, thank you. This is fascinating. We've been, you don't know this, but you've been cauterized on this.
Hey, Councilor Staley.
I've got several questions. I'll ask a few and then come back if after someone else asks theirs. So, question number one, that Luton Arch, why, or are they, and this is for Director Cotter, are they still using that, that style?
Design?
Yeah, that design. And this is kind of a double question, but it's still question one, is why was that concrete so powerful?
So strong. Well,
Why aren't we still, you know, like this, the concrete in my sidewalk is great. Why aren't we doing concrete like that?
well, I would speculate that back, you know, Luchen was really a purveyor and was one of the first to really bring concrete and rebar together to create a bridge. Now there's so many unpatented, you know, designers like Vanessa that would design you a brand new bridge with full plans that I would expect that people aren't still practicing the Luchen Arch approach. There's more modern methods to analyze current designs and things of that nature. So I would, if that was your question, I don't expect that they're still doing the Luchen Arch design for new structures.
Pronounced Luchen or Luton?
Luchen?
Luchen. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you don't think they're doing those anymore? Even though this thing lasts over 100 years, that is like fabulous.
It is
what
fabulous.
A testimony. Mm-hmm. So, okay, and the concrete thing, where maybe you're just going to say that's lack of quality materials in today's world, that we can...
Yeah, I mean, the compressive strengths came back very good. The ones at the arch and the ones in the pier and the ones in the abutments came back in excess of 4,000 PSI. Only an area right above, kind of near the spring line, where the concrete's about 26 inches thick and not as important came back about 80% that strength, but Vanessa and her team are not concerned about that. You know, it had good aggregates, had good pace, had good sands, and so it has stood the test. And they've refined concrete and asphalts over time as well.
Okay, then question 2 and 3 are kind of together. How old is the 6th Street Bridge? And could we be looking at any funding from the National Historical Society or, you know, some kind of a grant to help with this?
First, on the age of the 6th Street Bridge, Wes, do you have that? I believe it was in the 70s. So early 70s, the 6th Street Bridge was constructed, and that's a very traditional metal bridge, not like the Lutheran Arch Bridge.
Because did you say that's the second oldest bridge in our city then?
No, that's the next one that we've targeted based on its sufficiency rating, and then our next one then would also be then the 49th Street Bridge. So,
do you know what the second oldest bridge is? And just curious.
We'd have to follow
Okay.
up. Yep.
I'd
Every
like-
one
I'd
of
like-
our bridge inspections shows the age and then the sufficiency, and I just don't have that off the top of our
Okay,
head.
and then how about that historical grant? Is there a chance
We can check.
help pay for any restorations?
There may be some abilities when we're working with the State Historical Preservation Office to see if there's anything that would be tangible for us to source. We'll certainly check.
And I have a few more, but I'll...
Sure, we'll come back to you.
Yep.
Thank you, Counselor. And Counselor Erpenbach.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Cotter, and all the team that's been involved with this. I don't want to come off sounding anti-history, but I really do want to explore just a little bit why, what's the difference in lifespan between, you know, we've got 100-plus-year-old concrete out there now. Mm-hmm. You're saying the design span, if we were to rehabilitate it in the way that we're talking about now, is about 75 years, and I assume there's some maintenance along the way too to get it to last that long. That's a tremendous amount of time for a man-made product like that. My question then is, what if we tore it out and built new? What would be the lifespan of that, given the quality and the design and all of the things that would go with modern technology? What would be the lifespan of a new bridge compared?
I think everything with today's elements in the environment is still 75 years, right? So we compared it to best available service life that the DOT uses today and what we use, which is our goal is in the environment that these bridges are in our part of the country, the amount of salts, the temperature changes, that our platform is 75 years, and that's why we compared new against rehabilitation.
That's pretty remarkable, and I think that's important for not only council members, but for citizens to note as well. Then I just had kind of a follow-up question, and I should have let you know this ahead of time, but I just have kind of, as Councilor Staley was alluding to, just thoughts and comments then about other bridges that are on our list. I know that there are bridges that are, and I can't think of the technical term, but kind of on the naughty list for the federal government in Sioux Falls. And I'm just wondering if you can give us just sort of that high-level overview of where are our bridges at this point and where are we headed with this?
Yeah, so I can give you some stats. We essentially, with having 50 bridges on our registry, and again, we split those, that we inspect them every other year. So our approach is we inspect half every year, and then we inspect the other half the next year, and we're on that rotation. We consider good is a 75 on a sufficiency rating of 0 to 100, and our composite score is 87.2. So the general health of our structures is very good. This particular one has been deteriorating fairly quickly for the last 15 years, but it's still structurally, there's no weight limitations. We were having this conversation earlier today, anticipating this is one of the key questions is really what's the health of our bridges, very similar to what's the health of our roadway system. And if you have a bridge that has a load limitation, and we've seen that in the last few years in the state and the counties, that if it gets rated at a certain level, meaning a typical normal loads can't pass over it, that's not a healthy bridge. We don't have one bridge in Sioux Falls that has a load limit. So that's kind of our first check. And then we start looking at what's driving the low sufficiency ratings. Here it is starting to deteriorate, but one of the real driving factors is age. And so hopefully that gives you some perspective that our overall composite score is about 87.
And again, that's valuable information. I mean, not only do we hear about it across the state and in our neighbors in the county, but other states are dealing with bridges doing all sorts of horrible things. And I think every time that happens, at least as an elected official, and I would assume as a taxpayer, you go, oh, how close are we in Sioux Falls to something like that? So that's good to hear that we rate well overall, and we're inspecting every other year. That's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from councilors before I go back to Councilor Staley? Okay, seeing none, Councilor Staley, go ahead and continue.
So back to our choices, the concrete repair versus we got a fiberglass wrap and then the replacement, correct? Those are the three options.
That's right.
So if, and you're talking about involving the public, I'm just curious how this looks moving forward. What does the council do with that information? Are we going, who's going to make that decision, which route you're going to go?
Well, I think too, State Historical Preservation Office will also have that, will also help us weigh in on that, because one of the things you'll see when you do a fiberglass reinforced wrap, you do see the overlap, you do see the seams. It's certainly a superior product because it's, it also, the cost is up higher. But if we can get a very similar service life with the shotcrete, that's already where we're leaning, is we think that that will look probably the truest historically and more consistent. You won't see the overlaps where two pieces of fiberglass have overlapped, things of that nature. I think one of the key things we really want the public to help us on is we don't have an arch bridge that the lights wash today. And just with all the pedestrian traffic down there, there'll be a greater lighting package with this whole bridge above and below. But then there's also elements of the River Greenway that were naturally not done because of the anticipation of this bridge. So we'll be looking at some of those options and trying to really have the community help us. What's that complete project ultimately look like?
But are you going to have open houses?
Yeah, we haven't really designed that whole aspect yet, but I think it will be, we'll do some presentations to the downtown groups, start to facilitate who would like to be involved, and then I'm sure there'll be a collection of architects that can maybe we'll ultimately create more of a public outreach steering committee that helps us really vet through options and start to get some feedback from the public.
So can we hold you to these numbers we have on this sheet here? Well, in the 4 point, I'm looking at the three sheets you've got here. It'd be nice if there was like a number on the slide there, but the concrete repair, you got those, there you go. So on all of those, you're going to be taking that backfill out, is that correct?
That's correct.
All of these have that upper renovation of putting more fill in.
That's right.
So at the end of the day, you're not going to be bringing these three options to the council to vote on. You're going to be probably bringing us one thing, and we're voting on that. Is that correct?
That's what we would say. We know that our job is to deliver you an efficient infrastructure package. We're certainly focused more on rehabilitation based on what we've learned about the structure and that it can be done. And then I think if you would allow us to really work through that with the public. And then I do want to just emphasize these are the common structural elements of those repairs. Those costs will go up once we add lighting, River Greenway, some of those factors to it. But these were to just keep the focus on the structure. This was those costs that are involved.
And Councilor Rolfing just mentioned to me, and again, I'm still learning how these things play out, but he said this will all just be in the budget. So we probably won't have any input into it then. I mean, as far as approving the final cost, correct? I mean, when we approve the budget, that will all be part of the package.
That's right. Well, it's actually in your current CIP today, 2018 through 2022. And the A Street Bridge design that would start this year is in there. But we wanted to answer the mail on if rehabilitation is even an option. And so, I mean, I would tell you that either way, we're going to deliver you a good rehabilitation project, and it would either involve shotcrete or FRP wrap.
And then just one more thing. Can you tell me on the 7 consultants so far, how much have we paid on consultant fees on this?
So we went through and I meant to finish my sentence earlier, we went through more of a gate system on this rehabilitation. So the first contract we did, ultimately we did this analysis for about $118,000. And it's been, we started to talk about this project and start to really kind of path forward about a year and a half ago to have some good time and contemplated thought on going through this study. But our gate system is we said, let's actually get in the river and let's look at, see if we've got any scour issues, because that was somewhat fundamental if we want to try to save this bridge. We knew if that didn't come back right, we were probably going to cease the project or, significantly maybe change the scope. That turned out very well. And then we did the next step is let's do some concrete cores. Let's send those off for analysis for compression testing and petrographic analysis. If that wouldn't have come back very good, we would have stopped the study. So our first, just in general terms, our first contract was about $46,000. Our next contract was an amendment to continue to do the analysis was about $60,000, and then our next one was about $12,000. So we've kind of taken a gate approach to spread out the resources and the scope of work to ultimately, we feel good with the results. We feel confident that we got a rehabilitation strategy, and ultimately this study has shown that it'll save us about $9 million from the cost of replacement.
So could it be this summer when you come back and give us the CIP presentation that this is going to be kind of firmed up, or
it's going to take longer than that.
Okay.
We'll ultimately, now we'll start to plan out the design. We'll work on a schedule. Again, we're not going to rush this. We anticipate to either do this work in 2019 or 2020. In the CIP, once a project is in the CIP, it has a life of 3 years. And so even if it was, say, fully funded today, we would have that project can stay alive for 3 years. But at any given time, if you have a question, we're always more than willing to come back. Our job is to find the most efficient, effective way to deliver this infrastructure. And I think this is what this analysis has showed us. Okay.
Councilor Erpenbach.
I just wanted to remind the team here and folks who are watching that it's really misleading to say that this council has nothing to do with how much that bridge is going to cost us. This council has everything to do with how much that bridge is going to cost. You look at the budget, you approve the budget, or you deny the budget, or you argue with Mr. Cotter about the budget. And then when it comes through as a contract, then you argue with him about that. This council controls the purse strings. Do not ever pretend that we don't have control over how much he gets to spend.
That's right. Each of these contracts you would have approved. And that, just like every council meeting, there are contracts that are on the agenda. And so ultimately every contract that gets before the city, whether it's a capital low bid project or if it's a design contract that meets the threshold, this council approves it. Okay.
All right, I have a couple of questions, if I may. Could you just go through, again, the difference between service life and design life, just briefly?
Certainly.
30 versus 75 years.
Design life is the design. That's the ultimate time frame we expect to get out of the structure. Service life is the time where we think we'll get without doing any substantial maintenance. On the rehabilitations, we have included in the financial pro forma that at year 30, we expect to have to do higher level of maintenance than typical what we're due on painting railing, doing approach slabs, doing deck seals, things of that nature. And so that's where we expect to get that level of service life before we have to do any more renovations.
And once you get to that point, you've done the service work, you're 75 years out. What do you think? Is it difficult to predict now what the possibilities that you could go through this process again and once again rehabilitate this bridge where you're going to get another 30 to 75 years life out of it?
Yeah, I think we'll see. But I don't think we're here to be able to predict. Everything that we have in our guidance is 75 years.
Sure.
I will share with you our key maintenance project for this year is the bridge north of the airport on Minnesota. This year it gets new approach slabs, gets a new deck seal. It's about $400,000 worth of work that'll get invested into that bridge to extend its life. And so as you drive north Minnesota, north of Benson Road, I'm sure we've already bid the project. You'll see some interruptions in traffic. That's that project, I think it's priority 6, that you've supported that actually allows us to do that necessary maintenance on those bridges.
Well, and I do agree that I love history and I love the idea of preservation. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can get a little overly wrapped up in nostalgia and then make poor financial decisions. But it seems like we're taking the right approach. I mean, this bridge has been around our entire lives, and it's one that I can certainly recall when my mom would take me down as a young child downtown. So it is rewarding to hear that we can preserve that and for another generation, actually. So,
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
One more comment. It's scary when you think about our interstate system and a bridge lifespan of 75 years. We're coming up on it. 50s and 60s is when they built most of the interstates. Mm-hmm. And those bridges, if they haven't been maintained properly, which it sounds like a lot of them haven't been, we had a big bill to come up with here in the United States, if not the states, to take care of those. So that just hit me.
Yeah, one thing I think we can feel fortunate, when you drive through and across our state, our interstate systems are in great shape. Our DOT is really invested. There's a few sections yet to be worked, but they really do stay ahead of our interstate system. You travel to other states, not as much, and more resources, more miles, but we can feel fortunate. Even our partners, Minnehaha County, they've invested a substantial amount of resources in the last 5 to 8 years into their bridges. And as you drive through the county, their bridges are getting healthier every year. And it's been a priority for the city of Sioux Falls, and it'll be a priority for the county and the state.
Okay, Director, there was also some discussion, too, about quality of workmanship today versus years ago when this bridge was constructed. Is it safe to assume that the engineering standards, though, in terms of the quality of the concrete, would not have changed? Because I do know from working with my father as he was performing his part-time job of laying concrete driveways and garage floors and sidewalks that I would work with him. And we would order the concrete by the yard, and it was a 3-bag mix or a 4-bag mix, a ratio of concrete to sand or aggregate. So is it safe to assume that those standards haven't been reduced over time so that you're sure that you're getting the strongest product possible?
Right. I would wholeheartedly agree that aggregates have how they sort, how they get added to concrete mixes, and then these commercial plants, they're state of the art. That whole process has only gotten better, and then just the quality control that happens on a job site is one of the most important things we do when we build a new road. So yeah, we're investing. Those standards, I would say, have only increased.
Okay, thank you. Counselor, you had another question?
Just one more response to Counselor Erpenbach is that to me, moving forward, is going to be very beneficial if we're involved on the front end of these projects and this discussion. Because once it does come into the CIP and the budget, it's very difficult to change something. And I'm hoping that we're going to be more informed and our input will be sought out. And I appreciate this presentation. It almost seems to me like you're giving us some choices here. So the input from the public, the input from the elected body here, I think is going to be really beneficial moving forward. So I appreciate the presentation and the discussion.
Okay, wonderful. And I do want to, Council Chair, just to make sure, just like we did with the wastewater study, we did put together a two-page take with you, elevates the key points of the presentation, and allows people that as they come to council meetings over the course of time, gives an aspect of the history, the analysis, and ultimately it is our recommendation to do a rehabilitation option, and then we'll start to work through with the community, and we'll certainly come back, I would say probably mid to late summer, with feedback that we've heard, just to make sure that you feel that you've had input. We also want you to come to those public meetings if it works for your schedule. So thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Director Cotter and Vanessa, for a fine presentation. And I'm impressed that everybody that was in attendance at the State of the City address stayed with us this afternoon. So those of you that are here, Tony, do not scan the audience. But those of you that stayed, thank you very much for your interest in our city. This meeting is adjourned.